Afternoon. It's Joyful Christian Hermit. I want to add on some things regarding Lent. One is that in prayer and in any of our spiritual exercises or practices during Lent, there's many wonderful ideas out there and practices that we can take up. So the other day I was trying to make a different type of a point and got off into, I think, hopefully not too rudely, but I liked many of the ideas given that people give. One is to sing hymns as prayer. You know, the Psalms are prayers and hymns, both. So I thought that was a great idea. Martin suggested that. And I think from somebody he heard a retreat, give a retreat, a priest, a Vincentian priest. And then, what was the other one? It was so good. Okay, I'll have to think on a little bit what he said. But that of singing hymns as prayer. Oh, doing the Stations of the Cross. Now, I was trying to make a different point with that if we approach Lent and take every person's holy person or saint, what they do for their daily, or at least for a time period, what really helps them spiritually, we can't possibly fill it all in our days and nights. All these wonderful practices. And from reading scripture to spiritual books that we might read, to a saint book, to Stations of the Cross, praying the Rosary, St. Michael's Prayer, all doing the Divine Office, going to Mass, all these different practices that we could take on. Silent prayer. See, an hour of silent prayer and contemplative prayer and on and on. So, but they're all good. Singing hymns, too, a type of prayer. Excellent. But we have to pray and ask. We don't have to. I'm thinking for me, for Lent, of asking God every day what he'd like, or Jesus, or the Holy Spirit. And, what do you want me to do today in Lent, this day? I'm just going to try it this year. Haven't done this before. And I'm also taking on a very joyous, upbeat, positive, not somber, but seriously joyous. And someday I may do a Stations of the Cross. I can choose trees out there or different areas of my bedroom. My cell can be a station here, there, and everywhere. And meditate on the stations or not. Just pray and ask, or what we want, what we think. This seems like a good thing to do. Like this, it was a priest, I believe, or a monk, Vincentian, who said he does the Station of the Cross every day, not just in Lent, but always, and that he feels he has really spiritually grown over time, over his life, doing the stations every day. And that's very good, or singing, or both. But it might not be for everyone. And if we, each of us, tried to do what everyone recommended, it might get a little bit difficult to fit it all in. But I like the ideas. Keep the ideas coming on how each of you celebrate Lent in one aspect or 5 or 10 aspects. It's good. I found my notebook that was from 20 years ago that has Dr. Elizabeth Wilhelmsen, who was, she is Professor Emeritus for University of Nebraska, theology, and was known at least 20 years ago as a world-leading expert on John of the Cross. And she taught a summer course in Avila, Spain. And I had seen it advertised like 3 years prior, or 4 years prior to 2005, in a national Catholic newspaper. And I thought if I could ever do that, I wanted to go. And there was also a course on Teresa of Avila, which she did not teach, but she covered a lot of Teresa. And then they had the person who did teach Teresa just read from Teresa's books. Well, I'd already read her books, so, that was not worth my painful sitting time in classroom, or with my knee on the ground and my, right leg hooked up over the side of the chair, so I wasn't fully putting weight on my spinal cord. It was hard on my knee. It was, and then I ended up having a terrible pain siege and realized I couldn't handle it there. So I got a flight and had to cut my trip 3 months short. But I was there for the 3 weeks, over 3 weeks, but 3 weeks of that course with Dr. Elizabeth Wilhelmsen on John of the Cross, and she covered a lot of Teresa, and went on field trips, and Dr. Wilhelmsen went along. She had grown up in Avila. Her father was a professor at Catholic University of Avila. So she and her 2 sisters grew up there. She wasn't born there. She'd early life in California. I think he taught at Stanford or something. So she's brilliant. We were in contact for a few years here, and I haven't heard from her. So I don't know what's happened. And I miss emailing, and keeping in touch, but something's happened. So I just have to pray. But I have the notes I took from that. I think I do better without my glasses, if I maybe back and forth maybe. But this is about John of the Cross is interested in man's soul. He uses the term alma as concept to represent the soul in a circle drawing. He created a circle drawing. Put this up, see if I get it on there. Circle drawing. And I'll go over this more later. So here I have agma, though, but I think it's alma. I corrected ALMA. Is the spiritual component of the man. Soul is real and a true component of the composite of man. And it penetrates and specifies it. A form does. We give form to our soul in our own expression. There's the soul above and then the body in most diagrams or most ways of thinking of man, that the soul is the superior, the soul is eternal, and then the body is underneath, but contains the soul, and maybe our soul kind of contains our body. But the body is temporal, but it does have we have a soul, and we sense in our chest area somewhere. They used to think it was more in the gut, and some people may, but I tend to feel more the soul in my center, more chest or a little lower, but right in there. So let's see what else is written. Aristotle's theory was part of Thomas Aquinas's of the time period. John of the Cross did not use as much mind. He didn't talk about mind as much. Mind does not specify where body ends and soul begins. Matter is changeable and permits change. I guess that's why I felt I could make changes in my approach to Lent. We're permitted change. I'm matter. My body is matter. And so I'm making changes in the matter parts of my Lenten journey according to God's will. Now, He may come back and say, no, I want you somber. I want you more feeling the sorrow of what Christ went through leading up to His death and resurrection. And if so, then I will do that. The form or the soul is not immutable. The soul is infused in the body. The soul uses the body. The soul verifies the body. These were statements she made about the soul per John of the Cross and what he knew insightfully from God and developed also. The soul is immaterial, it's immortal, and it's indestructible. Our souls are indestructible and immaterial. So they're not matter. They're immortal, they're forever. They're not bodily, but the soul uses the body. The soul verifies the body. In essence, the soul does it makes the body, in fact, as something verifiable. Without our souls, the body wouldn't have life, wouldn't have content and immortality, wouldn't have essence. It would just be a body, matter. Matter without soul is just stuff like my dresser over there, my altar dresser, or this bowl, or this statue, water font. So the soul is over the body, considered over the body, and is an essence to existence. Existence allows it to be. Man is a unity in one supposit. St. Thomas Aquinas said that. Man is a unity in one supposit. The soul is always going to be different than the body, and people often undermine their souls. We can undermine our soul. We can foul up our soul. We can get in the way of the soul's beauty and functionality and essence. Soul is spirit. In Platonic tradition, the soul falls and accidentally conjoined to the body, but wants to get away from the body. That was in Plato's tradition. It's not the way John of the Cross looks at it, or Christianity. Heart is referred to as the will. The will is the beast. No, excuse me. My eyes are goofy. My glaucoma or my cataracts are growing, so I'm sort of in between trying to look without glasses and needing glasses. So the heart is referred to the will. The will is the heart of the soul. The will is within our soul, and it's the heart of our soul. Double checking what Lovey had there. The acts of memory, acts of will, and acts of intellect are considered the powers. Memory, will, and intellect are powers. Lovey, what do you have, honey? Oh, a ball. That's good. Or toy. You play with the toy. Good boy. Good boy. Mercy, why don't you find a toy? Okay, and that's the part. That's the composite, which man gets his directionalities. Our direction comes from a composite, and this is what St. Thomas Aquinas developed. There are 11 passions, and so we have the powers, the memory, the will, and the intellect. They considered earlier on as being the powers of our soul, with the will being the heart of the soul, the basis of the soul. So the greatest aspect of the soul is our will. Passions are the directionalities of man: love, joy, sorrow, hope, despair, fear, boldness, and she mentioned a few others, but those are big ones. Love, joy, sorrow, hope, despair, fear, boldness. Aspects that are passions of our soul, but give us direction. Directionalities, ways in which we go about living. We have sorrow, we have hope, we have despair, we have fear, we have boldness, we have love, we have joy. Man has to perfect himself, to perfect what is there. These passions have to be probed, perfected, controlled, used. And there's only one way for man to perfect himself: through the virtues. The cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, and courage. And that also is a schema by Aristotle. He developed these thoughts. It's not Christian basis, but it's based on natural reason. So it's not against Christianity. It just wasn't based or formulated from Christianity. Others had schemas, like Hugh of St. Victor, a medieval mystic. He includes the supernatural virtues, and he uses a tree as his model. So he has supernatural virtues and natural virtues, is what he calls them. On the tree that he has, his tree diagram, or whatever, one side is the old Adam, and the other side the new Adam. Most all consider, but in his tree, the root of all vices is pride. The other side is the antidote. All the virtues are considered the antidote to pride. The root of all virtues is humility. So the root of vices is pride. The root of all the virtues is humility. These are just, things that, like mentioned Hugh of St. Victor, but, John of the Cross, St. Thomas Aquinas, Plato, Aristotle, they were philosophers, but saints then began to ponder these issues and came up with schemas, with plans or with drawings even, that help substantiate or help people understand the thoughts. And it was this tree that Hugh of St. Victor developed that John of the Cross approximates. It's how he went from there and developed his schema. But he goes along with this tree aspect, and that the root of the vices side of the tree was pride, and the root of the virtue side is humility, and there were supernatural virtues and natural virtues instead of cardinal virtues. And what's the other two besides the cardinal virtues? Well, cardinal were the main virtues, and then there's the other virtues, which probably equivalent to natural virtues. The supernatural virtues would be the cardinal virtues that I mentioned. Dogs are getting excited. Prudence, justice, temperance, and courage. And natural virtues, things like, self-control, patience, etc. Did I say patience was a cardinal virtue? Let me look here. No, temperance, courage, justice, and prudence. So patience would be a natural virtue. Anything that's more of our natural matter and instinct and body that we do. And the supernatural virtues are the higher level, including our intellect and our will, which is the center of our soul. So, it talks about John of the Cross, a little bit more of his life. Let me get back down to anything more about his schema. Okay. At Los Monteverdes, St. John designed the cloister. The arcade is preserved, very classical. He started doing more at a certain time of his life. He began doing more imagery, more design. Along with designing the cloister, he designed a cloister, the format of that, but he also designed his schema. He designed a very classical arcade that's preserved there at Los Monteverdes. He had a sumptuous Andalusian landscape, so he was involved in nature. Let's see if there's anything. I'd forgotten this. His body is incorrupt. It was recently examined. Some parts were taken. Anyway, this was his first basic schema, his first basic of this is the soul in the center this is the whole of the human, and this is the center, which to John decided and thought through carefully, and I think it's really was persevered and is preserved as a very good schema of these matters, of what is involved in a human being, what makes us up, what we are entailed, all aspects of the human being. So the intellect and the will are in the very center. I'm going to just peek ahead here and see if I have any other notes. That it says up here he also had an image of Our Lady. I guess there's a little bit more here. Here's a diagram that she drew. I wrote as fast as I could. I knew I was experiencing a great soul and a great will and intellect in Elizabeth Wilhelmsen. And I was very blessed to have that 3 weeks of being in a classroom of maybe about 13 of us in there, 15 at most, I think 13 or 10. What a blessing of my life. My mother had passed the previous October. Miracle that I made it over there and be in this classroom. This is a non-Christian diagram right there. You get that. At the very top is the one, spiritual simplicity. This isn't a Christian diagram, but it was what was thought earlier on. Neoplatonic schema. Perhaps, it might have been done by Plotinus even. Then the one, it was at the top. Then idea came next. Then the human soul begins up there, but not at the top. It's underneath idea was the soul. Then at the next section down was the ascent at a natural level, with including no element of grace involved because it wasn't Christian. And then at the very bottom was the material and the temporal world. So Plotinus, the philosopher, the focus in his schema was on the ascent of man. Let's see. He was a disciple of Plato, and he wrote the Enneads, Enneads. He was exemplaristic. Things come to be in conformity with models. And the models are called ideas, according to him, and the ideals. Plotinus' occupation in life was the ascent of the soul. Each soul participates in psyche. Souls precede their birth. A soul falls at birth and takes a body. Like the soul would just fall out from the universe and take a body. He considered the matter wasn't good or evil. It just was matter. Plotinus is a contemporary of Augustine, also of the Manichaeans. The Manichaeans and the Christians, though, tried to say that soul is good plus matter, that it has a and evil. Maybe that was the Manichaeans, that they had good and evil in matter, but it says here this was condemned. It's not considered our Christian thought. Exodus reditus, exiting and returning, way of ascending through asceticism and contemplation. I'm trying to remember what this what the exiting and returning was. Maybe that the soul would exit and then return. That might have been. Not this isn't Christian though. But they did. And some of these things were adopted though, or utilized by Christianity. They developed a way of ascending through asceticism, strict control over the body and the mind, exercises of control, self-control, and simplicity and fasting and things like that, bodily control. So one way of ascending was through asceticism and contemplation. Asceticism of the flesh and the senses. And through asceticism, they felt, through asceticism of the flesh and the senses, the mind becomes clear. And this has some reality to it. It can. Plotinus does not emphasize virtue, though. Made it clear it was not a religion. So that did not influence John of the Cross. these are different people that influenced John of the Cross in part, or he read them and studied them to understand, what these other philosophers thought. But they weren't Christian, and that particular one did not influence John of the Cross, that saying that that virtue was not an emphasis, that it did not emphasize Plotinus's schema. But in others in Christianity, virtue does influence us, just as vices do. Plotinus, in fact, was anti-Christian. He was in the 4th century, so the 300s. Plotinus was an elitist also. He did not think others had a chance to ascend to higher levels of being and thinking and doing. Let me see. Oh, here's somebody. John Baruzzi, a Frenchman in 1929. He writes well, she said, beware. He writes well, but tries to superimpose the thoughts of Plotinus onto John of the Cross. So don't, if you hear that or delve into this more, which I don't think any of us would. We're busy on the spiritual way, on living and, learning, but applying what we learn of the best of Christianity, to our lives so that we can spiritually evolve, lest we forget the purpose is to learn to love as God loves. So to ascend spiritually will include very much the greatest virtue, love. Jacques Maritain was about the same time period of Jean Baruzzi, and also in France. In his work, he had a chapter on John of the Cross and refutes Baruzzi's work. So these are just some of the traditions before John of the Cross. John of the Cross, of course, was in the 16th century, was a friend of St. Teresa of Avila. So the image that the notion of having an image or creating an image comes from Genesis. Christians think iconically, as did the Greek fathers. Icons, making an image. The soul is made in God's image. To be closer to God means to perfect the image, our oneness and likeness in God. St. Augustine still has notion of image, and he carries it even further. He had an image, you'll just see my little tiny circle there. A tripart divisions of the soul, intellect, memory, and will. And he had the soul having the 3 powers, plus 3 operations of the soul. So we had, the 3 powers, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And Augustine, Father represented memory, Son, the intellect, or corresponded to these, and the Holy Spirit, the will. And the 3 operations that he had in his image of the soul are imitation and image of the Trinity. 3 operations are this of the soul, imitation, and image of the Trinity. So the soul was one operation of the soul, operation of imitation, and operation of the Trinity, image of the Trinity. St. Augustine is known as the Doctor of Grace. The Neoplatonic schema has no grace. Grace is given and created by God, and it's supernatural. Man perfects the image, his image, and God, in God, through and by grace. Augustine Christianizes Plotinus. Then she goes into love, and I think... Well, I mean, there's more here. I guess I'll give this background, some of it here. She mentioned here that St. John of the Cross is a scientist of spirituality. The figure of St. Thomas Aquinas is important to understand. He considered, because he brings the soul, understanding of the soul spiritually. The materialization of the soul cheapens it. The soul is purely spiritual. In St. Thomas's thinking also, he brings in the intellect and the will as rational faculties, and they help make choices and also help devise love or determine love. The intellect and the will. The will is involved in making choices and in developing what love is. And we can will to love or will not to love. So the intellect are all activities of the mind. This according to St. Thomas Aquinas. All activities of the mind, all acts of cognition performed. Human thought is never image-free. Think of that. It's true. When I was trying to think of devising a way to keep track of what I was doing in different times, and thought of the clothesline and clipping on, and I could change what I needed to do to other time periods if some interruption came. And I was thinking in images. We are... Try to think and not have images. Human thought is never image-free. The intellect is the power of the soul. The will is the seat of love. It performs the highest possible acts of love. Our will does. I remembered that. The will is also the seat of hatred, though. The opposite of love. It is not emotions, but it responds to emotions. Emotions is separate than the will. But the will can respond to emotions, good or bad, love or hate, or variations between those two. Internal senses or powers of the soul. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, there are 4 internal senses. Let's see. The common senses, cognition, which is the ability to protect oneself, to recognize things. It's how we, cognition is how we recognize things or ourselves. The common senses see objects or images. Imagination is retentive power. Memory falls into this aspect, imagination, retentive power. And fantasy is the 4th of the internal senses, a creative power based on what is stored in imagination. And I think I mentioned this before, the passions of the soul, 11 passions of the soul. The soul but came about due to the incarnate nature of the body, rooted in the flesh. Love is one of the passions of the soul. There are 5 external senses. Says here in St. John of the Cross, All information, see, so John of the Cross is later on after Thomas Aquinas. St. John of the Cross is all information that comes to the human being is filtered through external senses. Mystical union with God happens through acts of the intellect and acts of the will. Act of knowledge and act of love. The intellect would have acts of knowledge and act of love, and that's included in the will too, though. The will has love. The will controls acts of love and acts of hate, responds to that. The intellect is part of the will and acts in conjunction with the will. That's what's considered in our soul, is our intellect and our will. Stored in the retentive power called imagination. What's in imagination? Have we ever thought of that? What's in our imagination? Or our images, our phantasms. These offer images to the intellect. The will retrieves the image and information from the intellect. This gets deep. I'm just going over the notes. I'm not getting in deep into it. But we could. It would be tempting to, wouldn't it, to have a course in these things. It's matters of what is the will, the will and the intellect comprising the soul, and how the will and the intellect help each other out within our souls. How they, the will retrieves the images and information from the intellect. And the images and the phantasms and the imagination and all offers images to the intellect then. They sort of work back and forth, but also the intellect then offers to the will information and images. And then the will acts on those by, yes, we're going to be influenced by them or not. The presence of created spirits, demons. The devil is a created spirit who disturbs the soul. Devils or angels communicate to man through internal senses. Our internal senses, we'll get to that, as exposed to our external senses. The devil does not, or angels do not, communicate through us through our external senses, through our touch, our hearing, our outer vision, our outer hearing, our smell, it's all interiors, how the devils and angels communicate to us through the interior senses. Angels and devils are both created, pure spirits in the natural order. Spirits cannot affect directly the soul, but move matter around. They can stir around the images, the phantasms, can move through outer levels into internal senses. These spirits can. Demons and angels. The perfection of the soul is perfection of virtues, natural and supernatural. Okay, here's the supernatural again. Faith, hope, and charity. Those are three of the supernatural virtues. More into what John developed, John of the Cross. They are infused and co-join operation of the soul to God. These supernatural senses do. Faith, hope, and charity, love. Cognition is an act of the intellect, an act of the will. John of the Cross follows the Thomistic model. Bipartite division of the soul. Augustine has a tripartite division of soul, like two parts. St. Thomas has two in the soul, I think the intellect and the will. Augustine has three. The memory, includes the memory in with the intellect and the will. He correlates the soul to the Trinity. We already had that. I mentioned that before. John of the Cross says the memory is the thesaurus of the soul, like a word thesaurus, but the memory is the thesaurus to the soul. It is through the memory that man exists in time and can live in succession, one man after another. St. Thomas puts memory in the internal senses. So see, they all have their slightly different models. Union of God is an act of knowledge and an act of will. That's what St. Thomas thinks. The process of cognition in John of the Cross, that schema has the mind only gains content gradually and through internal senses. That's how our mind gains content. The subject must know before we can act. Here's the Book of Ascent, chapter 10. More information, all this. I don't want to do an overload. There's more on this, but I think I'll stop on that page and go over more. I just want to show you this. This is the important thing to remember. This is what has helped me so much in the last 20 years of understanding. You've got to look here at it. Okay, so in the very center of our beings is the intellect and the will in the soul. The soul is in the very beginning, very center of our beings, of our human beings, is the soul. And contained with the soul is the intellect and the will. The next ring out is understanding. Now, I think it was Ignatius of Loyola who included understanding in with the intellect and will. But John of the Cross, I like John of the Cross's model. It has the understanding as the next ring out. If we have our intellect and our will conjoint in the center of our soul, the intellect informs the will, and the will draws information out from the intellect. So we want to keep our wills very strong and our intellect clear and pure. This is my what I took from all that she taught years ago and understood from it. And understanding is next. We require understanding. Understanding is very close. It's like wrapped around our soul, that we understand the will and the intellect and how powerful they are for humans. Next comes the circle of memory. And remember, I think it was Aquinas that had memory in with the intellect and the will. But understanding really comes before memory in the reality of how we think, how our will acts, how our intellect acts, and their combination. Understanding wraps around those. Memory comes next, where we have our memory very close in to our intellect and our will. Remember, our intellect has images in it. And that's what we remember. We remember images and we understand images. Before we understand emotions and things, or remember emotions. We're more likely to remember images. But understanding's up there because we have to have understanding in our intellect and our wills before we can remember, have memory at all, and even we have to understand the images then. Understanding is very basic to our intellect and our will. These come in an order. And then our emotions is now images is imagination, our ability to create, and in dreams, images come to us in dreams. Memory, of course, we know that's everything we can remember from what we read, what we say, what we perceive of people, of images, of its memory is if we had even more purity of soul, more purity of intellect and will, we would remember things like our birth or what was before our birth. If we had that keen and purified of soul, then our understanding and our memory would be more purified too. Let's see. Emotions come next. They're the next ring out. We're coming out from our beings. And, emotions is out there. It's more temporal. Our emotions definitely are, we can lose our emotions easily. Love and hate, our temper, our feelings, our moods. They're not more central. You can see how we're getting more and more temporal as we go out. Then their senses is in the outer ring of our beings. And the one closer to emotions is our inner senses, our inner sight, what we think, what comes to mind, our inner hearing. If you have a locution, or it may seem like it's a voice speaking to us that would be, but no one else will hear it. So, it's our inner senses, our inner sight. We see our dreams, we see our images, we see our memories, but others don't. See, that's our inner senses. What else? Inner touch. We can feel something without using our hands. That's partly through our intellect, through our memory, through our understanding. Let's see. Well, all of our senses, there's 5 senses. There's hearing, sight, hearing, sound, sight, taste, smell, and touch. Those are the 5 senses. And we have those all interiorly, inner, if you just think about it. All of them are inner. But then in the very outer of the senses are our outer senses. That's physically touching, physically tasting, temporally hearing with our outer ears, smelling with our noses and our sense of bodily smell. It's all the bodily senses. Whereas the inner senses are more of the supernatural and interior, more connected with our interior beings. So this is a great diagram. And the devil, as I've said before, if you've listened to other videos, God allows the devil to have, and that reminds me, a person left a good comment describing more about devils and angels that I'll try to talk about, but another time. But the devil is not allowed to do anything with our soul. That is off limits to the devil. But God allows the devil to have access or to confound or to try to mess with or tempt our understanding, our memories, twist our memories. It's how we have people, somebody will say, well, I don't remember that, or that isn't the way I remember it, if they're having an argument. And the person who's truthful and honest will, yes, that is the way it is. That was how we remember it, The other, no, I remember it this other way. The devil can get into someone to twist their memory. And the one with the stronger will and intellect will hold the memory accurately. Imagination with the images in dreams, the devil easily can get into our dreams more easily than the devil can get into our, a lot of times, our temporal, but the devil also can mess with our emotions pretty easily. Get us scared, get us feeling tempted, get to our pride, and that's partly with emotion. So, and the devil can mess with our inner senses. The devil can appear as anything the devil wants to, can appear as himself and try to freak you out, mess with your memory, confuse your understanding of things, or can even mess with our outer experience. Literally cause some bad thing to happen, something evil, can tempt someone to act in an evil way, to take bodily action, or to say something. The devil can create, I've had this, a foul's odor. And I know and I knew it was an outer sense thing because my husband at the time smelled it also. A stench. There's a specific stench that's the devil's stench. That odor that the devil will leave in a room. And then, of course, there's temporal, other kinds of bodily things that the devil can mess with. Hurt, sicknesses, plagues, anything that is in these outer levels, God allows does not prohibit the devil. Our intellect and will not. That's why in this our soul, the devil cannot have our soul. And that's why we must keep our intellect and our will strong in God and clear, pure, filled with love. And from those rings on out, keep those protected. But it emanates from the center of our beings. And I don't utilize it simply for that, for, thinking of the devil, but this helps me understand other people a lot. And at what level they are reacting to me. And helps me understand more. And then to, if need be, use intellect to explain something, but keep my will strong and my will rooted in love as best as possible. Once we get our will weak, we can easily have a negative emotional reaction or see things differently even. have an image of something or have distorted imagination. And images are powerful. See, they're right up there close in, and so is our memories. Very powerful for human beings. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. And I think I'll stop there. There's been a lot. This other stuff was just information lead up of how something like this develops. But John of the Cross's model is, I think, next to none as far as what is practical and accessible to us and easy for us to understand and to keep in an image and to utilize in our everyday spiritual and temporal lives. It's a very functional model to take in and ingrain and put to application use in helping us with even moderation of our own, keep ourselves in balance and to protect ourselves. And when we have a spiritual experience, we can discern also, and we can discern others better through knowing, what level are they in, how are they reacting, what is out of order, and for ourselves, is if we're tempted and we fall, it's the will, or did our intellect get messed up and tempted? Did we, or a combination, like people who get all wrought up in politics. And of another friend who's practically made herself more sick over politics and the anger that comes out. And fearful for her grandchildren, she says. And if we use our intellect and our will to keep a balance of love going instead of hate, because maybe a person we don't like, their outer image or their voice. I had somebody say, I don't like how his voice sounds. He's loud and gruff or something, That is so much on the externals of the outer. We have to look to the soul. Man sees the outer. God looks at the soul. That's from 1 Samuel 16:7. Look to the soul, the intellect, and the will. Is whatever leader. Are they intelligent? And is their will wanting to do good for your country? In any country? Or like what Father V has to deal with a dictator who has people killed. That's not a loving soul. It might be very bright, but see, so there's all these things. If we want to discern someone, use this model, but do it honestly. If we get our emotions, which is on the peripheral too, use our emotions, or even our memory, that, I was brought up this political party or that one. And no matter who's in office, if it's not that party that I grew up being, or that I remember from 50 years ago or something, then we might be in trouble with being upset for 4 years or something. In this country, it's a 4-year cycle. So you see how something like this can be practical and keep us on the straight and narrow of balance, even for our own sakes, for our own intellectual, emotional imagination, the images we hold. If we hate someone because of how we see them or how they appear, don't like the haircut or however it is, sound of the voice. That's using the outer senses even to create, but it means our intellect and our will aren't very strong. If we allow such externals get to us, or even a politician get to us like that. I have someone who was horrified that I mentioned something factual about the person. Didn't want to hear anything that was, and it was a positive factual. I'm trying to look at the bright side of, and the good of anyone. Otherwise, we're going to have 4 years of misery and ruin yourselves. And fears, unfounded for the most part. I mean, nothing bad, nothing is not our responsibility. I mean, we're not doing the actions as far as spiritual responsibility. The elected officials have that spiritual responsibility. We did our best, praying and electing whoever, we discerned we thought would be the best, or many people do just according to how they were brought up. They were one party or the other. But something like this can really save us a lot of grief in life, just in politics alone, or in other relationships, marriages. Try to see the soul of the spouse. And then if there's something, try to build up all these layers, these rings, these levels around, these rings around. Try to build up everyone's emotions, everyone's images, everyone's understanding, and our own. That's a good project, a big one, to exist based on developing a strong will and intellect. And from there on out, then, a good understanding, clear memories, honest and clear memories, accurate memories, viable and helpful images, positive images of others, rather than negative and ugly and hateful images of others. For our own sake, it's a virtue. Love is the greatest of the virtues. And remember, they linked the virtues right in there, the cardinal virtues and the natural virtues in there, in the center, in our souls. Oh, this is important, good stuff, I think. There's lots of it out there. Here's yet another. And see, that's the thing. Of course, our minds, our intellects, and our wills are eternal. So our intellects, don't worry about not being able to take it in. We can take in all the good that's out there. As far as physical acting on it, we're limited. Our outer senses have temporal limitations. But our understanding doesn't. Our emotions don't. That's the one thing I noticed when I was dead back in 1987. Everything went with me but my outer senses, my body and my outer senses. I had full capacity, keen capacity in my inner senses. I could communicate with God in thought flashing. I could move. I could, everything was there. Everything was glorious and joyous and loving. My will and my intellect were there. My memories, very clear. I understood so well. I knew God wanted me to go back. and rear my children and fulfill my mission. But I couldn't even it was so glorious there, I couldn't bring myself to say I would. The best I finally got out was, I'll do what you want me to do. Because he asked me twice. The first time I said, no, I want to go on. I want to go on with you. Then he showed me my children. Then he showed me a beet red, round, blowing up face of my former husband. Oh, they'd had their dad to rear them. God asked again, you want to come with me or go back? Oh, what a dilemma. I couldn't say, it's so wonderful there. But I did say, I'll do what you want. I'll do whatever you tell me to do, God. Whatever you want me to do. That was the right answer. Well, he would have been pleased had I courageously said, I'll go back. I didn't have that courage. Because it's so wonderful. Even though my heart sank, my gut sank, inner, all inner, not my temporal, not my outer. When I saw my children, oh, my children. And then to be shown the former husband, not in a normal face, but in a temper fit, horrible face, demonic face, the reality of what has taken over him, or had at the time anyway. And for all the time I had interactions with him, until the last was out of, I haven't seen him since the youngest was out of college, graduation, that he didn't help a cent with, I might add, any of them. So that's in my memory. And not a good memory, but it's a reminder. Our memories can be very helpful, lest we forget and get fooled or duped or something. We do need to remember the good and the bad. That's part of our intellect making discernment decisions, and part of our emotions that are involved. And what we see, images. God used images. He didn't say, oh, think about your children or think about your ex-husband and how cruel and what horrible temper and what kind of life they'd have with him. He didn't say a word. He just showed me images. I understood immediately. I remembered what it was being with him and how he mistreated the children, even in visitations. And how afraid they were. They didn't like going. So, emotions got me. I had emotions. So everything goes with us. So all these things are forever. So this is worthwhile knowing to help know ourselves too in situations. Is this my outer senses reacting? Is this my inner? Is this my emotions reacting? Or is this down in the nub? Is this my intellect and will reacting? Which has a lot of validity if that's reacting. The others, the emotions, maybe not so much. So, or the images that we have, maybe we need to change our images, say of politicians, or go neutral and wait until 4 years is over and see. Is it the end of the world? If it is, then we'll all be on the other side. If not, then we maybe will realize, well, I wasted all that time in anger and hate and unfounded fears and negative thinking and ugliness over what? A political party. One over another. I mean, come on. We can do better. God bless His real presence in us. Have a beautiful rest of your day, night, whatever it is for you.